Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is George Ortega, and I'm here to talk about happiness, because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Tonight I'm going to be talking about happiness and the determinism versus free will question, and basically trying to explain how understanding that fate or God really determines what we think and do can help us become happier. Specifically, the show will be about how understanding that our thoughts are determined can help us to not blame ourselves and each other, and to not feel envious of others or feel prideful about the things that we do. Okay, let me begin by explaining why free will really is impossible. Then what I'll do is apply that understanding to our lives, and you know, just give examples of how we can use that knowledge to help us become happier. Now, I know that like free will is an integral part of the Judeo-Christian tradition. You know, it's important to a lot of people, and so I just want to say that understanding determinism is not necessary to being very happy. One can achieve what I'll be explaining in the show without believing or understanding determinism, and if one feels more comfortable believing what one's religion teaches, then that's fine. This is just an option that, I mean, basically in this way it makes it easier to achieve certain ends. Okay, basically let's start with a definition of free will and determinism. Free will is really the idea that you know, we can decide whatever we want to, that you know, we can decide what to think, and then we can decide what to do, and nothing is compelling us to do anything. And then determinism, otherwise also known as predeterminism or fate or destiny, is really the idea that that basically we do what we do out of necessity, that we're compelled by, you know, fate, destiny, God, the past, to whatever we do, that it's really not in our hands. Okay, and the idea goes back at least as far as the Greeks. Pythagoras, Democritus, and Parmenides basically said the same thing, that the idea that things happen because of necessity, because they have to happen, because of causality. And many philosophers have addressed this issue through the years. It is one of the big questions in philosophy, although they're, you know, basically most of them have been in agreement that free will is impossible, and determinism is really what governs you know, our lives. What I'd like to do now is just read some quotes by a famous physicist. His name is Sir James Jeans, and actually he's a famous British physicist, astronomer, and mathematician. He was the first to come up with the idea that the universe is continually creating matter. You'll find them in encyclopedias and books about physics. In 1943, he published a book called Physics and Philosophy. And it was originally co-published by Cambridge University Press and Macmillan Company, and it's still in print, actually, by Dover Publications. So what I want to do is read what he writes on page 5 of the Dover edition. Okay. Practically all modern philosophers of the first rank, Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, Locke, Hume, Kant, Hegel, Mill, Alexander, as well as many others, have been determinists in the sense of admitting the cogency of the arguments for determinism, but many have at the same time been indeterminists in the sense of hoping to find a loophole of escape from these arguments. Often they conceded that our apparent freedom is an illusion, so that the only loophole they could hope to find would be an explanation of how this illusion could originate. Okay, then Sir Jeans also makes the point that this isn't just a philosophical question, it's also a scientific and a logical question. It also has spiritual basis. So on page 212, Sir Jeans writes the following: the further psychology and common sense probe into the question, the more necessary they find it to accept orthodox determinism. Our acts are determined by our volitions by our motives, and our motives by our pasts. The psychologist will think of this past in terms of heredity and environment, the moralist in terms of ethical and spiritual influences, and the physiologists in terms of physico-chemical activities. But all will agree that the relative strength of the various motives is determined by past events, so that a man never chooses for himself, his past always chooses for him. Okay, and further down on the same page, he basically asserts that physicists also concur, most of them, with this idea. And that's notwithstanding quantum physics that came about in the early 1900s, and which is something that I'll get into later in the show. Now, Einstein was also a determinist. Here's a quote from Einstein. "Honestly, I cannot understand what people mean when they talk about freedom of will. I feel that I will light my pipe and do it. But how can I connect this up with the idea of freedom? What is behind the act of willing to light the pipe? Another act of willing?" Okay, so basically, you know, the consensus really for years has been that free will is impossible. And now I just want to kind of like try to explain that in a bit more detail from the various disciplines. In terms of psychology, there has for years been a debate called the nature-nurture debate, whether genetics or our environment really determines our behavior. And the irony here is that whether it's genetics or the environment, it's not our free will. You know, with genetics, if genes are determining what we say or do, obviously it's not our wills. You know, we're basically being led by our genetic makeup. And again, with the environment refers to our past, to our to influences around us, what we've learned, what kinds of experiences we've been subjected to. So again, in that sense, that also prevents any matter of free will. And then the other idea is that Freud introduced the concept of the pleasure principle, so that whatever we do, you know, is always for the purpose of seeking greater pleasure. And so that pretty much constrains what we do to that end. You know, we don't have a choice to do anything but that. Okay, there's a logical, a more common sense argument for determinism against free will, and that's the idea that, you know, if we really had free wills, I mean, we would be very happy and very good. Because think about it, if we could decide what thoughts we would have very pleasant thoughts all the time. If we could decide what we would do the kinds of things that would bring us great pleasure all the time. You know, we would probably also be very, very good people. Some people believe actually that that we have a limited free will, that basically, you know, we don't have complete free will, but we have a limit. But, you know, generally, I've never heard a good statement of, in that case, well, in what sense are we free, and in what sense are we not free? Generally, that's not an argument that really, you know, holds much weight. And then the last idea in terms of logic is like, well, you know, thoughts just come into our minds. I mean, for example, a minute from now, I have no idea what I'm going to be saying. You know, I'm going to be saying something related to the outline that I'm holding and about the show, but I won't know what I say until I actually say it. And this applies to everything we think. This applies to everything we say and everything we do. Until we find ourselves doing what we do, we really, you know, we don't really understand or you know, control that kind of a situation. Okay, I'm gonna next go into the physical reason for it, but that gets into quantum physics, and we're gonna get a little involved first. So what I'm gonna do before that is do a song related to determinism, and it's about the idea how like sometimes like when people do really well, we'll praise them, we'll think, hey, they're such great people, and when people fail, we'll blame them, we'll just find fault with them, and the idea is that great people do great things because of fortune, because of fate. They were lucky, and some of us just fail again because of bad luck, because of misfortune. So this song tries to present that idea. It's called Lifestyles Revisited.
Young boy, born and raised in Hollywood, dreams of someday being a star, and grows up to become one, simply a matter of destiny. Young girl, raised in San Francisco Bay, dreams of returning back home to her dear Africa, and at last finds her way. Fortune planned out the day, both appearing to have decided the future they ride into a world of wondrous possibility. Still the truth remains, they were granted no choice at all in determining how their lives would finally come to be. The universe does not allow us to decide the world we come to see. For a while at first, so much appears within us, say, our way is destiny. Young boy, raised on the Lower East Side, dreams of coming to power and money and fame, but the days will not lead the way, and to prison he strays. Young girl, raised in Bedford-Stuyvesant, dreams of riding the highway on up to the sky, but the road leads to red lights and sighs, and in heartbreak she dies. It was fate that created their way long ago. There wasn't a chance in the world for their own destiny. Still the world comes to blame, despise them for falling to tragedy. And in tragedy, the world stays blind to the reality that the universe does not allow us to decide the world we come to see. For a while at first, so much appears within us, say, our way is destiny.
Again, the basic idea is like by understanding that everything is pretty much predetermined, we would be kinder in how we judge each other and ourselves. Okay, so let's get into the physical idea. Okay, in physics there's a principle known as the principle of cause and effect, and it's really it's part of what's been known as Newtonian or classical physics. It's the physics that dominated physics until the advent of quantum physics in the early 1900s. And basically, what it says is basically that the past determines the present, and the present determines the future. It's easy to understand in terms of billiard balls. When you hit a billiard ball into another, that second billiard ball will hit a third and perhaps a fourth, and it's kind of a chain reaction, a chain of cause and effect. And essentially, in physics, that's how all of matter operates. And, we being comprised of matter, we human beings are atoms and molecules and all, that's actually what governs us. So then in the early 1900s came the advent of quantum physics, and something that was known as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle that came in 1924. And basically that demonstrated that it's really impossible to determine simultaneously or to measure simultaneously both the position and the momentum of a particle. Okay, that means that you could spot a particle, but if you spot a particle you can't see how fast or in what direction it's going, or if you see how fast or in what direction it's going, you can't know where it is. And a good way to explain that is like, if you're looking at a quarter, if you're looking at the head of the quarter, you can't see the tail of it, even though it's still there. However, if you look at the tail, the head is still there, but you can't see it. So anyway, this Heisenberg uncertainty principle basically led some physicists to conclude that since subatomic particles don't have a position of momentum that could be simultaneously measured, then they don't have a position or momentum simultaneously at all. And that's kind of like saying, well, since we can't see the tail of a quarter when we're looking at the heads, that the tail somehow just vanishes. And so, they also, as part of this understanding, felt that the law of cause and effect is negated. This is called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics, and it was basically started by a physicist named Niels Bohr, who was actually one of the giants in quantum physics. He was one of the developers, actually. But the idea is that nothing in quantum mechanics or quantum physics requires that interpretation that does away with cause and effect. Actually, when you think about it, quantum mechanics needs cause and effect to work, because what happens is because we can't measure individual particles as we do in classical physics, quantum mechanics uses what's known as probabilities. In other words, they measure groups of particles moving at the same time. So then the idea is that quantum physics couldn't possibly work if these groups of particles weren't working in a cause and effect fashion. The probabilities determine the cause and effect behavior of these particles. Okay, and also the idea is that quantum phenomenon is really limited to the subatomic world. It's not really, particles, atoms, neurons and all really behave in the classical way of classical physics of cause and effect. So basically, the idea is that the argument that quantum mechanics negates cause and effect just isn't valid. And let's briefly consider the religious argument. The religious argument is a bit perplexing because, in one sense we believe in an omnipotent God, an almighty God, but then how could an almighty God give us free will? Because basically what an almighty God wants to happen will happen. And the first instance of this question in the Bible is in Genesis 17:1, where God says, "I'm the Almighty, obey me and live as you should." Well, I mean, how could he be the Almighty? And, if he was Almighty, we wouldn't have a choice. We'd have to obey him. So, religion is kind of questionable on that. And then you have to consider also that, religion is sometimes an authority on morals and ethics, but traditionally, historically, it hasn't been a very good authority on reality. For example, in religion it says that a woman came from the rib of man. I think there are very few people that still believe that. Another thing that religion says, the Bible, according to the Bible, the world is a little under 6,000 years old. And most of us, understand that our world is much older than that. So that really the Bible can be perhaps held as an authority in some ways on moral grounds, but in terms of the actual physical nature of reality, it really isn't such a valid authority. So then, we're left with the conclusion that, we really are puppets. A lot of us don't, like to believe this, but, we're puppets, and God or fate or destiny is the puppeteer. William Shakespeare actually put this in a more acceptable manner to people when he said, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. So yeah, we're players. It's like we're actors given a role in a script, and we're just acting out our lives. Having said that, I've got to, mention that we can still be very happy. If we're somewhat happy now, or if we want to become much happier, we can become much happier, even though we don't ultimately have free will. What happens is, if we do become much happier, we will have been fated to. So, it's a subtle distinction, but something that needs to be made. Okay, so now I just want to go into why this is important to our happiness. And I want to understand why I want to explain why the belief in free will basically causes much needless blame and pride and envy. Okay, so when we believe in free will, if someone does something wrong to us, we'll blame them. If someone lies to us, we'll say, this is a bad person, look what this person's doing to us, how terrible. And our blaming leads to a separation between us and that person. We hold that person accountable, and we hold that person as bad or evil or something. That, it prevents a cohesion in the relationship. On the other hand, when we understand that this person's actions were predetermined, we understand that they were fated to do what they did, so it's really not their fault in a sense. And actually, in a sense, they're actually victims, because when somebody does something wrong to us, nonetheless, we generally are punished by God or nature or laws when we do things wrong, so the person is actually a victim of this fate. And so in that sense, we might blame God or fate for, causing this person to do what they did, but we wouldn't blame the person, and that preserves our relationship. Okay, and sometimes we would have to take precautions. If somebody's lying to us or disrespecting us or doing something against us, we might have to take measures to prevent them from doing it, or to remove ourselves. To be wary, to take actions. But it's much more pleasant, it's much wiser to do what we have to do without the blaming, without blaming the actual person. Okay, so now naturally the same thing applies when we do something wrong. Generally a lot of us feel very guilty when we do wrong, and we punish ourselves, we condemn ourselves, so that when we understand that really our acts and our thoughts are basically predetermined, fated, we're much more understanding of ourselves, much more forgiving. The same applies to the issues of envy and pride. Sometimes we know somebody who's done something great, and we say, hey, this is such a great person, look what he's done. The person, sometimes we think, hey, this person is better than me because of that. This person is someone to, sometimes when we hold people as better than us, we tend to lower our own self-esteem and comparison. And self-esteem is very important to our happiness. It's one of the 4 character traits most conducive of happiness. So that again, when we see that everything is determined, people who we would otherwise believe are somehow better than us, we would believe that they're fortunate. They're lucky. People don't do great things because of anything that they did personally to do them. They do great things because they were fated to do them. The same principle applies to us. Sometimes we'll do something really good, and we'll say, hey, we're much better than other people because of this. It causes pride. We attribute these successes to ourselves, and free will, fosters that. When we understand that free will is impossible, we'll say to ourselves, it's really fortunate that the universe or God has allowed me to do something great, has allowed me, has used me in that way. But we would feel grateful, for that opportunity. We wouldn't feel prideful. There's a saying, a religious saying, that pride goes something like before the fall, or pride leadeth to fall, or something like that. And it's true. Arrogance. When we become arrogant, it really works against us. So, understanding that our thoughts and actions really aren't according to our free will, but we are fated to do what we do when we do great things, whatever, helps us from being prideful. Okay, so I just want to go through some basic considerations about understanding determinism, because in order to use this principle wisely, you have to understand it. the idea is that we still get either rewarded or punished for what we do. So, this isn't license for us to do bad, because if we do wrong, God or nature is going to punish us. And if we do right, generally God or nature rewards us. And again, we do have to protect ourselves from the actions of others. When other people are doing things that perhaps aren't in our best interest, we have to be wary. We can't just say to ourselves, well, they're destined to do what they did, and so it's not in our hands. We can do things to separate ourselves from situations, to address situations. That's why we have laws. So it's not that, understanding determinism doesn't negate our ability to act. It simply means that what we do ultimately has been determined, has been fated. And the last thing is that, we can achieve this kind of understanding, not being blameful, not being prideful, not being envious, without understanding determinism, but it's generally more difficult. When we understand that we're really not responsible for what we do, that God or nature or the past, cause and effect, really determines what we do, it's a lot easier to just enjoy ourselves, to maintain the closeness we feel with each other, and to like ourselves more. Understanding determinism in that way leads to better relationships, and better relationships has been shown to be extremely important to our happiness. Relationships are really the number one reason how that most people use to obtain our happiness. So naturally, the better our relationships, the happier we will become. Okay, well, that's all we have time for tonight. Thanks for watching. In the future, we'll explore other topics designed to help us better enjoy life. This is George Ortega saying, be good, think well, feel very happy, and I hope you'll join me again next week here on The Happiness Show.
Happiness is powerful. It's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.